Hello, Terrace CRC. I was pleased with how short I was able to keep the last video while still explaining the concept, at least introducing it. There's a lot more to any of these. Uh, Several of these topics that I share, I have in the past written sermons about, but I'm trying to not repeat the sermons. So today I'm going to try it again. I have just the word that will get me started, and the word is scapegoating. And it is found in the Old Testament in a story where two goats are to be chosen, and they each have particular sacrificial roles. But one is to be called the scapegoat, and the sins of the people are to be laid or prayed onto this goat. And then it's to be sent out into the wilderness to carry the sins of, visually carry the sins of the people away. There's a story some historians or rabbis tell, I forget where I read it, that one time the goat came back. And so that from then on, that created some challenges. So from then on, they would assign someone to escort the goat into the wilderness and make sure it didn't come back. I'm not going to go into detail. So that's the scapegoat. That's the concept of a scapegoat in the Bible. And scapegoating is another thing we do related to blame shifting. It can be explained rather interestingly and complexly. If you are familiar at all with Rene Girard, well, he became a scholar, but he became a scholar by not the usual path. And I first heard of him from CBC Ideas, and I think they still have his talk up there. But he started finding this scapegoat pattern really interesting, and started finding it in literature, but also then in the customs of ancient peoples. And so basically the pattern would be something like this. There hasn't been rain for a while. The community gets restless about this. And so the community seeks to identify someone to hold responsible for the lack of rain, or someone who's to be a sacrifice to disrupt the lack of rain, to disrupt the drought. And in some cultures, that would actually be a voluntary thing. Somebody would volunteer to be that sacrifice. And so then there would be a death, sometimes a lynching type of a death, because the crowd believes the anxiety has been solved. So, some of these old westerns had this kind of story of where there's been a crime committed, a horrible crime, and the whole town is in an uproar until the authorities or somebody identifies someone to be held responsible for it. Often there's not much thought of what we would call justice in that. To Kill a Mockingbird is really that kind of a story. And there would be a lynching. Someone would be hung or killed in other ways, stoning. And then the society, the culture, would believe that the problem was over, and so there would be less anxiety in the culture. I'm not talking just about the rain here now. This pattern happens anytime anxiety comes into a system, but that's a different video. So whether the scapegoat is a chosen unwilling sacrifice or a willing sacrifice, there's a relief that comes when the sacrifice is made. And in some cultures, then, the person who was sacrificed becomes highly respected by their reputation for having saved the community from the problem. Now, more directly, this is related to the blame shifting I talked about last time, in that if I feel somewhat guilty for whatever is going on, let's say the crops in an agricultural village are not growing well, and they're not growing well in an area where I know I dumped oil from my oil changes in my car, or I sprung a leak in my gas tank and I drove down that side road, dripping gas everywhere. And then there's this known problem of the crops not growing well, then I'm going to feel somewhat responsible. So I will be eager to help the community find someone else to blame, to be not held responsible. And so I will participate then in scapegoating. And Rene Girard's thesis on this, which I really, really like, is that Jesus became the only truly innocent scapegoat. And part of his purpose in it was to reveal to us the fallacy, the uselessness of this actual pattern. Because when someone is held responsible when they're not responsible and they die, whether it's for lack of rain or for the crops not growing right or whatever it is, anxiety in the system, it's not really solving the problem. The anxiety will come back in a different form because it's not resolved truly. And so Jesus, especially in the last weeks of his life, exists in a highly anxious cultural situation, with the tensions with the Romans, the tensions within the Jewish peoples, and he becomes the lightning rod for all that anxiety. And everyone pretty much ends up participating in scapegoating Jesus. And he becomes then like that goat that carries the sins of the people away. But Girard emphasizes the exposing of the emptiness of this pattern as a teaching that we should stop it. So there too, like with the blame shifting, because Jesus died, we can start watching for when we're scapegoating, and we can choose to do something different, because we know that scapegoating, or blaming someone who's not really fully responsible and having them pay a price, is not really solving anything. So he took on the price himself to show us how that works. So that's the topic of scapegoating. I'll catch you next time.